Welcome student. Today we will learn about the functions. These are today contents of our lectures. First we will learn introduction to functions, why we need functions, advantages of functions, type of functions, syntax of user-defined functions, user-defined function, declaration, definition and call, working with functions, calling and called functions, parameter and type of parameters. Function, what is the function? Basically, function is a subpart of a program used to perform a specific task and is executed individually. Basically, function is work on the principle of dividing a large program into the basic building blocks, and this mechanism is known as a function. So, why we need the function? Basically, it is difficult to implement a large program simultaneously, so we have to divide these programs according to its functionality and scope in number of sections, number of parts or number of subprograms. This mechanism and this technique is known as a function. Why we need the functions? So there are some reasons which allow to us to make our concentration on function. First one is to improve the readability of codes. As we know that function is basically subdivisions of a program. So when we make the subdivision, then there is less number of the code, and this less number code can easily readable and understandable. Second point is that it improves the reusability of the code. Same function can be used in any program rather than writing the same code from the scratch. Means we can, when we use a function, this function can be used the different palaces of a given program, so it produces the reusability of the code. So this reusability of the code basically very beneficial for the user. Now third point is that debugging of the code would be easier if you use function, as error are easy to trace. So using the function we can easily find the debuggings of the codes. Fourth point is that reduce the size of the code. Duplicate sets of the statements are replaced by the function's code. When we need the same function at the different places, then there is no need to write the code. We can replace that codes by function's call. So that is the very beneficial of use of the function. What are the advantages of the functions? So first advantage, using the function we can implement modular programming. What is the meaning of modular programming? Making a small module of a program and combining these small modules, we can create a large program. Now, function makes the program more readable and understandable. Third point is that using the functions, the program implementation become easy. And fourth point is that once a function is created, it can be used many times, and this mechanism is known as a code reusability. Using functions, larger program can be divided into the small module or small programs. Next point is type of the function. So there are basically two types of the function. First one is system defined function and second one is user defined function. So what is the system defined function? Basically system defined functions are inbuilt functions which are defined by the system and their characteristics are inbuilt in the libraries. So system defined function, the function whose definition is defined by the system is called as system defined functions. The system defined functions are also called as library function, standard functions, and predefined functions. The system-defined functions are defined inside the header files like as we use in the C language as studio.h, conio.h, maths.h, string.h. These are the header files, and in these header files the corresponding functions definition and properties are defined. The examples of system defined functions are printf function, scanf function, the square root functions, and string ln functions. These are the examples of system defined function. Second one is user defined function. The function whose definition is defined by the user is known as user defined function. In user defined function, the user are free to define their own code for user defined functions, and he is free to give the name the functions, and he is free to give a number of the argument in the function. Every user defined function must be declared and implemented. So when we use the functions, whenever we make function call, the function definition get executed. For example, the main function used in the C language is also a user defined function because its implementation is done by the user. Now, syntax of user defined functions. So basically, when we define any user type function, then that is the common way of declaring and describing and calling the functions. First, how we define the functions. So first we have to give the return type the function, then name of the function, and in these parentheses we basically pass the number of the argument, and it is also known as a parameter list. And this definition is basically consists of the two factor. First one is header and second one is body or block of code. So in header we basically include the return type, name of function, parenthesis and argument list are types of the arguments passed in the function. Next we use the function body that is represented using the curly bracket, and all statements mentioned in this curly brackets is known as a block of code or body of the function. So what is the return type? Basically return type is any data type like is integer, double, char, void and so on. So that is used for a return type. Return type also depend on the user in which function he want to give the return type and which function he don't want to give the return type. The function name, basically function name is intended of the user or its desire of the user which type of the name is given to the function. So it is advised to have a meaningful name for the function. Next is argument list. Basically argument list is list of contains a variable name along with their data types. Block of codes are basically set of the statements used in the curly brackets to make the action of the function. Now this is the simple example how we define the functions. So first, as we mentioned in our syntax, I have to mention the return type, then function name, then parameter list. So here return type of the function is integer type, and here name of the function is add, and parameter is passed with the two integer value int x and int y. And these curly brackets are used to write the codes regarding to the functions, and that is also known as the functions body. So that is the simple way of defining a function. Basically when we use any user defined function, then we have to use these three steps. First, function declaration, second, function definition, and third, functions call. So we will learn one by one what is the function declaration, what is the function definition, and what is the function call. Function declaration. The syntax of the function declaration is mentioned here. First, when we declare any function, we first need to give the return type the function, then function name, and then in the parenthesis we pass the parameter list, and then we use the semicolon. For example, in return type of function I taking int, name of the function addition, and I pass two parameter int and int. So that is the way of declaration of the function. The declaration of the function is also known as a function prototype. And why we need the function prototype? Function declaration is also known function prototype. The function prototype is used to tell the compiler about the number of arguments and about the number of the parameters passed in the parenthesis and types of the parameter. So we also can say that function prototype is basically used to introduce the function signature. If the function prototype is not mentioned, then the program may compile with some warnings, and sometimes the program can generate some strange outputs. So it is necessary when we use any user-defined function, then we should declare or we should mention the prototype of the function. The compiler does not, when the compiler does not find, when he give the error or warnings, when the compiler does not find what is the function and its signature, it means what is the return type of the function, what is the name of the functions, how many number of the parameter pass in the functions, and what's data type of the parameter pass in the function. So these all things we have to declare before using the function. Otherwise, at the time of the compiler, there will we get the warnings, and we also can get some strange outputs. Now, definition of user-defined function. So, when we make a definition of user-defined function, we generally use a given syntax. First, I have to define return type, function name, parameter, list, and then a body of the function or block of the code of the function. So we also can say that user-defined function definition involve two things. First, the header of function, and second, the body of the function. Here is mentioned as the example here. The return type of function is int, name of the function is addition, and parameter declare is here int x and int y, and body of the function or code block of the function is mentioned here, that is return a plus b. So that is the general way. Whatever user defined function we declare, we have to follow this syntax. A function definition comprises head and a body. Next things, the header gives the information about type of function, name of function, and list of the parameter. The list of parameter comprise types of and name of the parameter enclosed in parentheses and separated by the commas. Next, how we call the functions or calling of a user defined function. So general syntax of calling any user defined function is that first we have to mention the name of the function, and we give the parameter list in the parenthesis, and then we use the semicolon. So that is the simple syntax of calling a user defined function. For example, I want to call a addition function. So first I will have to mention the name of the function. Name of the function is the addition, and then I have to pass the parameter. So I pass here two parameter 10 and 20, then semicolon. So that is the way of calling any user defined function. So when we call a user defined function, the function are invoked by the action of the function call. When the function call made, the calling function asks the called function to perform a task. So what is the calling function and what is the called function? Basically, calling function is that function in which we pass the actual parameter. Such type of the function is known as a calling function, and called function in which we pass the former parameter, that is known as a called function. So we also can say that when we make a call, then there is a interaction between calling function and call functions. When the task is done, it means the called function complete his task, then he backs the report to the calling function, and in such a way there is a interaction or communication between calling and call function. Now, working with function to explain what is the calling function, what is the call function, and how they make the interaction, we take this example. There is a program codes regarding to calculate the square of an integer value. So here that is the function call. As I told you, when we make the function call, then I need the name of the function, then in parenthesis we pass the parameter, and this parameter is known as the actual parameter, and then semicolon. So there is the function call. So when we make the function call, the control is transferred to the called function, that is the called function, and when control is transferred to the called function, then actual parameters send their copies to the formal parameter, that is the calling function, and that is known as a called function. So parameter in the calling function is known as the actual parameter, and parameter in the called function is known as a formal parameter. So at the time of the callings, the actual parameter send their copy to the formal parameter, and formal parameter get this copy and make the required operation in the writing box of the called function body, and he will get here and he will process, and after processing he will return value to the calling function. So this called function performing his task backs the value to the calling function. So there is a interaction or communication between calling and called function. Now, there are terminology calling function and called function. So what is the called function and what is the calling function? So calling function, it is used to initiate the function execution. That means this line decide when function has to be perform its task. It means the calling function is basically used to starting the execution of the function, and he send the control to the called function. So we simply can say the function that have the actual parameter is known as a calling function. Next is the called function. So what is the called function? Basically, called function is the function definition. It decides what to be done the function on the function call. It means action is basically performed in the called function, and after completing the function, the code function back sends the result or to the calling function. In other definition, the functions that has the formal parameter is also known as a called function. Next, there are some terminologies in the functions like as a parameters and types of the parameter. So first things, what is the parameter? Parameters are data values which are passed from the calling function to the called functions, and basically these parameters may be have some data type and a variable, or it may be takes the constant values. There are basically two types of the parameter according to the function: actual parameter and formal parameter. So what is the actual parameter? Actual parameters are basically those parameters which are used at the time of the function's calling, or in other words we can say the parameter which pass in the calling function is known as the actual parameter. Basically actual parameters are transferred to the formal parameter, but they always transfer their copy. The actual parameter are unchanged. And what is the formal parameter? The formal parameter are those parameter which are used at call functions as receivers of the actual parameter. So there is a interaction between actual parameter and formal parameter. Formal parameter basically send their copy to the actual parameter basically send their copy to the formal parameter, and formal parameter receive these copies and perform the corresponding action in the body of the function, and performing the action the called function return the control to the calling function. Now there is an example to explain parameter and types of the parameter, like what is the actual parameter and what is the formal parameter. So we are taking a code segments here. We are mentioned here to calculate the sum of two integers using the function. So here mention name of the function addition, and this function does not want to take any type of return value, so he will is that return type is mentioned void. Here that is the function called. As I told you, what is the function called? Having the function name and parenthesis with parameter and semicolon, that is now the function call. So there is we make a function call. So the parameter pass in this time or in this calling function is known as the actual parameter. When we make the function call, the control is basically transfer to the called function. Here parameter of here, so parameter pass in this called function is known as a formal parameter. So this actual parameter send their copies to this formal parameter. Here means actual parameter is a and b, and formal parameter is x and y. So x and y get the copies of a and b, and here perform their actions, and then control is transferred to the calling function. So this is known as a calling function, and this is known as a called function. So there is no any return type. So simply control will be transferred to the call. There will no return any type of the value. So in next lecture we will learn the classifications of function basis of parameter and return type value. Thank you.